No, it's not, doesn't work that way. But anyway, yeah, I was like, what are these people saying? I'm an agile guy. I don't want to read a waterfall book. So I think it was unfortunate that Reinertsen's publisher, I don't think it's probably Reinertsen himself, but Reinertsen's publisher decided that they were going to put a waterfall on the cover. It doesn't do justice to it. I understand why they did it now, because it's a book about flow, and a good metaphor for flow is water. Get that. It just kind of strange to me that, so finally I opened up this book and I read it, and it was one of those moments in my life where I felt really bad. Not bad because the book is bad because I should have read it sooner. And the people who recommended it were absolutely 100% right. So if anybody is looking at this book and saying to themselves, I'm interested in agile, not waterfall, I'm not going to read this book, hopefully I've convinced you that that's not a reason. Now, there may be other reasons why you don't read it. Really difficult, by the way. Reinertsen himself talks about it, and some of the YouTubes and things, and he says he uses skiing as the metaphor. I've never been a skier, but I can understand it. He says this is a double diamond course. This is the most difficult of all things, and it is difficult. But as I like to tell my sons, or at least I've said this before, I hope he's right here, so he can confirm it. He's over off camera. He's getting ready for school. It's not meant to be easy. It's meant to be worth it. Meaning that there are hard things that we need to do in life, but we do them because they're worth it. The analogy I use for that is, and this is true of all things in life, by the way, if you want to get people to really be motivated to do something, so this is for people who are going to be leaders and bosses or managers, whatever you want to call yourself, give people something that they can accomplish, but that's not easy to accomplish. We know this in science, but you know it intuitively. I got any gamers out there? I know we tend to have, in the technology world, we have people who are gamers. They play video games. I do. Not as much as I wanted to. I don't get to read as much as I want to, so I don't get to play games as much as I wanted to. It seems to be a big time sink for me. It's kind of like addictive. Why is it so addictive? Well, the good games are addictive, not because they're easy. If a game is too easy, we become bored with it. Same thing in life. You give me a too easy task, I'm going to be bored with it. You give me if in video games we call it the boss. You got, a lot of times you got to beat the boss level to move up to the next level. You never beat him the first time, really, because if you beat him the first time, it's too easy. You have to do it again and again and again. But you can. It's achievable, and that's what work should be. That's the way our lives should be. We should set, when we're talking about setting goals, they shouldn't be easy goals. They should be achievable goals, but they should be something that we have to work for, because there is human dignity, and we do get rewarded mentally with either dopamine, serotonin combination, whatever, when we have these type of things. If it's too difficult, what do we do with the game? We say, forget about it. I'm never going to win. Why even play? This book is that. Very challenging, but worth it, right? So hopefully Reinertsen doesn't mind, because I think I sell more books for Reinertsen than he does himself. But what I'm going to do, all these ideas, I'm going to put my own spin on it, obviously, but these are Reinertsen's ideas. This is, for me, the book of Agile. He didn't set out to write the book of Agile, but he did, nonetheless, because what he does in this book is he has a lot of mathematics to prove his point. That's the tough part for me. Wasn't exactly a math whiz, still aren't, still am not a math whiz, right? So the key is that he has proven a lot of the things that I talk about. And I'm going to use that word in the mathematical sense. Math can be proven. 1 + 1 = 2 is a proof. Math is different than science. It's similar to science, but it's different than science, because math can be proven. The whole point of science is it can't be proven. I know that sounds really strange. We're going to talk a little bit more about science later, because most people, I think, have it slightly askew. Science, by its very nature, is built on hypotheses and theories. A theory just says that the hypothesis is likely correct, but it is not science unless it can be disproven. Because evolution is a theory. It has to be able to be disproven in order to remain a theory. It is not a fact. A preponderance of evidence says it's true. Science doesn't work in fact. Mathematics does. That's the difference. Hopefully I've captured that enough. I'm going to go through, he has 7 major categories. He breaks them down into other small categories. I'm going to go through the 7 major categories, and I'm going to show you how the stuff that you've already learned fits in. That's the funny thing. You've already learned by the second day, plus with Jim's 3rd and 4th day, you've already learned pretty much all you need to know about how to go about doing this stuff. I'm going to show you how it fits. And I'm going to introduce Reinertson's work. Topic number 1, understand your economics. We talked about that a little bit when we talk about things like the golden rule of Agile, right? Which is deliver optimal value in the shortest time possible. Anything in quotes, by the way, is Reinertson's words, not mine. He says that we should look at products, and this is not just software, right? This is any product that we're building. So that's the good thing. This is any product. And you can think about any service as well. Not just products. I mean, a service itself is sometimes a product. If you look at what we're doing here, the Agile MBA is a product. How do you measure it if you're trying to understand the economics of it? And he says there's only one thing that matters in the end. And that thing he calls life cycle profit impact. What does that mean? That means when you have a product is really the result of making decisions. I can do this thing or I can do this thing. I need my product to do this thing or do this thing, right? It's a matter of making decisions. Every decision that we should make should consider this. How will this decision affect the ability of my product to make money through its entire life cycle? And life cycle is the important one, as I told you before, and we talked a little bit about it when in the previous one, when we were talking about total cost of ownership. That's life cycle. How long is the life cycle of software? Long. What should I consider? The entire cycle, not just a little bit at the beginning. How does this decision affect the entire life cycle is the important thing. Because then you're going to make different and better decisions. That's one of the problems we have in business. And it's built into a certain degree the way we finance businesses, right? Because we finance business, most finances through stock. And the market, what do? Every quarter we have to give earnings, and we get punished by quarter basis. That's sometimes a problem because what we're not concentrating on is we're not concentrating on the long term. This is something that's different between the West, as evidenced in the United States at least, and the East. Japan, they look at the long term, right? This is my understanding. They look at total cost of ownership. They sign 99-year leases. That's a big difference when you're only concentrated on the quarter. When you're concentrated on the quarter, you're going to make decisions that may affect the quarter, but may adversely affect future quarters. Total life cycle. And he says, if we're going to look at one thing, the one thing that's overlooked, there's a whole bunch of things that go into this concept of life cycle profit impact. But if we're going to look at the one thing that most people overlook, in fact, he says that most 85% of companies overlook. And he's a mathematician. He was a nuclear sub-engineer. So when he comes up with the number 85%, it's coming from somewhere. He's not just pulling it out of his you-know-where. And this is 85% of the companies that he's aware of, which means that 85% of the companies that are smart enough to hire him. So the number's probably worse than this. 85% of the companies or more do not compute cost of delay. Now, some of you might understand what cost of delay is. If you don't, we'll talk about it. In fact, I'll have somebody else talk about it because they do a better job than I do. But if you don't, that's great. I didn't before I came across his book. I might have kind of known it, but now I've got a better idea of it, and I understand how important it is. So if you haven't seen it or heard it before, great. I've got one more bullet point I want to talk about here, because I think it's important before I get into what exactly cost of delay is, or actually friends of mine will talk about. Well, I consider them friends. I don't know if they even know who I'm in existence, but I'll have Black Swan Farming talk about cost of delay. We need to watch the product that we're building and not watch the workers building it. What do I mean by that? And when product design and development is complex, manufacturing is not. And we've talked about this concept before. In manufacturing, if you can tightly control what the workers do, if you keep a sharp eye on them, if you manage them, you're going to get better results. Because the nature of manufacturing is I'm building the same thing again and again, and it has to be built the same way. If there's a whole bunch of variation, I lose. So watching the workers, checklists, waterfall, those kinds of things work very well. Lean works better, which is kind of a more agile thing, but we won't get into that for now. And knowledge work, it's the product that has to be unique. I'll talk more about this later. So we need to pay attention to the product and not the workers. It's not a matter of that if I put in manufacturing, if somebody works 8 hours, they're going to have some kind of output that is linear to that 8 hours, so that the value of them as a worker in manufacturing is keeping them concentrated and focused on a single task, repetitive, for 8 hours, which is mind-numbing. I've done it before. I've worked in factories before. It is mind-numbing. If you've ever done it, I did it. I talk about a magnet factory at some point in this course that I used to work at, which was a great job. I loved it, but it was mind-numbing. I used to spend all my day, daydreaming about winning the lottery and how I'm going to spend my money, or chatting about, the Cincinnati Reds baseball game, because we used to listen to it on the radio while we're doing work. Anything but the work, right? Different when you're in knowledge work. So what you should be really concentrated on in product development is what is the movement of the product through the system. Especially in software, is the value moving through the system, and that's watching the product and paying attention to the product as opposed to paying attention to the people who work, because there's an asymmetric nature to knowledge work, meaning that just because I put an hour of work in doesn't mean that I get some kind of output. I can put 1 hour in and I can get huge amounts of value, or I can put in hundreds of hours and get no value. There's an asymmetric relationship. So what we really need to pay attention to and what we need to focus on is the work, not the worker. I like to tell jokes and things. My joke about this is I call this the G-GOAT, the greatest graphic of all time. I'm not really good with graphic design. It's amazing that I used to design websites because I'm not very good at graphic design. Back when I was doing websites, it wasn't as important to make them graphically pleasing. This is why I don't design websites anymore, because they should be graphically pleasing. I'm not going to be able to create it. I've had people threaten to make this better and send me it, and they've never done it. So we're going to stick with this one until we get a better one. This is a product development lifecycle flow. On the left-hand side, you start with an idea. That's how all work starts, by the way. All work starts up here. You have an idea of what you want to do for your product. I'm going to assume that you have an existing, I'm a software guy, so I keep going back to software. I'm assuming you have an existing software product, you want to make an enhancement to it. That's an idea. Now that idea is going to flow through a system. And depending on your system, the number of steps and things that it takes along the way is defined by the system you create. And at the end, you're going to make money off of it. You're going to deliver it to somebody, they're going to buy it, you're going to make money. That end part is really what I want to get to. The sooner I get to it, the better. The more money that's at the end of the rainbow, the better. The shorter it takes me to get there, the better. right? Optimal value in the shortest amount of time. If you're doing waterfall, this is waterfall, by the way, you're going to go through a number of steps, and you can see those boxes up top that go through. I might go through what? System design, requirements gathering, low-level design, may actually do some programming. I'll go through some testing, right? I'm going to go through all these different things. And then I finally get to money. And I've exploded. You see how I've done this with the graphics? This is why it's the greatest graphic of all time. I've exploded one of those boxes because in each of those boxes, you have queues. A queue is nothing more than a line of things. We'll talk a little bit about queues in a second. And you have an input queue, you have a work queue, things I'm currently working on, and then I usually have an output queue where I'm going to take it and move it to somebody else's input, right? And in a project world, what I've done is I've taken an idea that is worth money, I've broken it down into some pieces during the requirements process, I put a little bow around it, and I shoved that whole thing through. It's kind of like a python eating a cow. And not only do I have one project, but I probably have tons of different projects. Now, remember, we're talking about products here, but now I'm throwing this whole project stuff in. That's a problem, by the way. You'll get it. If you don't have it already, you'll get it by the time I'm done, I hope. That I'm going to refer to this graphic from time to time to show you how it fits in with what I'm talking about. All right. I said my friends at Black Swan Farming are explaining cost of delay. They will. Here's a dictionary definition because everybody likes that. You'll probably write it down. You don't need to because you have access to all the PowerPoint. But cost of delay is a way of measuring the impact of time against expected outcomes or value. How does time affect the value I can or cannot deliver in my system? And for years, I really love the way they do this. Black Swan Farming. So just for a second, I'm going to stop the share because I forgot to share the sound. You're probably going to want to hear this. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to reshare with sound. And if I've been good, I'm going to click on this link and hopefully it's going to open up the browser so I can show this to you. Hang on one second. Did it? No, haven't been good. Go ahead.
Go ahead and try that one more time.
I'm trying it. For some reason, I'm trying it. It's not working. All right, hang with me, guys. Anybody got a joke? Jim, Edward, you want to tell a joke while I'm figuring this thing out? I usually have it queued up, but I was lazy this morning. All right, I got it queued up now. No jokes? Probably better. New share. Aha, he says.
Good sound.
Share with sound. I'm going to press this button. Here's what you're going to do for me. You got to help me out. You got to let me know that you actually hear this. You can see it now, though, right?
Yeah.
Now we should be able to hear it too.
In most organizations, it seems to take a long time to get things done. Part of the reason for this is not that each of the actions required takes a long time, it's that things actually spend most of the time in various queues waiting to be worked on. Here's a fairly typical example. It's a feature that took a total of 46 weeks to deliver from when it was first captured. Of that time, it actually spent 38 weeks waiting in various backlogs and queues. You may not believe it, but if you do the same thing in your organization, you'll probably find something similar. It is not unusual for the amount of waiting time to be in excess of 80% of the total time taken. Seems crazy, doesn't it? The thing is, most organizations are blind to queues. We tend to focus more on the efficiency of the parts of the process, not the whole system that is required to deliver value. This hides how long it takes to deliver value end to end. Part of what drives this blindness is that we have a really poor understanding of how much the delay is costing us. Our gut feel about the urgency and value of things is often quite wrong. For instance, when we worked out the cost of delay for this feature, we discovered that it was actually worth over $200,000 per week. So, the 38 weeks that this opportunity spent waiting in various queues actually cost the organization almost $8 million in revenue. If they had known the cost of delay earlier, they would have done a number of things differently. If we are to make better decisions, we need to understand how the value of the things we are working on is leaking away over time. Knowing the cost of delay means we can put a price tag on all these queues and waiting. So, understanding the cost of delay helps us in three ways. Firstly, it helps us make better decisions by making the economic trade-offs visible. The value of speed over efficiency is easy to understand. Secondly, it helps us with prioritization. By using CD3, cost of delay divided by duration, we actually deliver more total value for a given capacity. And lastly, cost of delay helps us to change the focus from dates and cost estimates, which can encourage the wrong behavior, to speed and value. Put simply, cost of delay is a way of communicating value and urgency. Without information about the cost of delay, the system will optimize for other things. For more information about cost of delay, take a look.
I always love the last line, by the way. If you do not optimize for cost delay, the system will optimize for other things. That's how systems work. We're going to talk a lot about systems explicitly after we get through this, but this is systems type of thinking. Your system will optimize around something. And it generally optimizes, by the way, around what's measured. Because I like to say, and I don't know if I've said it before in this class, because I say it usually a couple times a day, it seems. And I don't know if I invented this or if I dreamt it or read it somewhere, but you all heard what gets incentivized gets done. Probably. And I think that's close, but it's not 100% accurate. What gets incentivized gets focus. What gets focused upon often gets done. So it's A equals B equals C, A equals C. If you forget about it, it's the focus that matters. What are we focusing on? And we focus a lot of times on metrics. So metrics become an incentive. And if we're not focused on cost delay, we're going to focus on other metrics. And those metrics are going to be the ones that are going to probably cause us problems. As they say in the thing, we're going to focus on date or scope or cost. What we should be focused on is value. Cost of delay is actually a measure of value, if you want to look at it that way. And in this particular black swan farming, I got some more information just recently about that. They went through this exercise with one of their clients, and they had 100 items in the backlog, and they found that 2 of the items would deliver 90% of the value. 2% of the items would deliver 90% of the value. Now, there's something that you're familiar with that's called the Pareto principle. And if you don't remember what that is, it's the 80-20 rule, which basically states that 80% of your value will be derived by 20% of your activity. Something like that. I paraphrase, please don't skewer me in the comments. It's close enough to that. Right? And if that's the case, what they found is by doing cost delay with this particular client, that 90% of the value was found within 2% of the activity. The problem with waterfall is you do 100% of the work. Why? Because you batched it together and you funded that work. So therefore, because 100% of the work has been funded, I'm going to do 100% of the work. But what would make most sense is to do 2% of the work and forget about the other 98%. Not worry about it. It doesn't do anything for you. You're spending a lot of money and you're getting very little in return. Don't confuse activity, right, with value, with output or outcome. Don't confuse efficiency with effectiveness. What you want is effectiveness. That's systems thinking. Efficiency, there's people called efficiency experts. They're going to come in, they're going to drain efficiency. What they're going to do is they're going to cut people, they're going to try to make them more efficient. Efficiency does not work, because what you're doing is you're taking pieces of the system and you're optimizing the pieces of the system. It doesn't make the system more effective. In fact, it's probably going to make the system less effective. You know where efficiency works? Manufacturing. You know where efficiency doesn't work? Product development, knowledge work. So every topic that Reinertsen has, I'm going to relate it back to something that I've told you you've already learned. Some of you may have figured this out. If you haven't, I'm going to draw I'm going to take the 2 dots, I'm going to connect them together here for you. Don't feel bad if you haven't. No, here's how it relates to Agile, at least as Larry presents Agile. The number one thing I talk about, where'd Carl go? Carl, he turned his camera off. Carl, what do I talk about? Because Carl said priority, I say sequence. I even said priority in Black Swan Farming thing. Larry says sequence. Why does Larry say sequence? Because it is the sequence that counts. Sequence your work in a way that derives the most value for the least amount of effort. Now, they called it something else, and they used slightly different terms. And if you were paying attention, taking notes, you probably heard it. It was called CD3, CD2, CD3, I think. Yeah, CD3. CD2 don't sound right. CD3, cost of delay over duration. What is the cost of delay? How long is it going to take me to, in terms of time? Because it's about time. What did we call it? We called it value over effort. Now, you may be asking yourself a very simple question. Larry, why didn't you just say, when we were on day 2, when we were doing this thing, why didn't you just say, instead of value, which is what I said, why don't you say cost of delay? Why don't you say relative cost of delay? Why do you think? Well, if 85% of the companies that are smart enough to hire Reinertsen don't know cost of delay, do you think that's going to resonate with the people I work with? No, it's not. Value, when we talk about value, I want you to remember how I phrased the question. Carl has already let the cat out of the bag. I've done this with Carl, so he knows, right? When I talk about value, I ask a very simple question with the people who understand value in the organization, usually the business people. And I say, if I delivered this today or this today, why do I put the word today in there? Because really what I'm asking is, what's the cost of the delay for this versus this? But I use the word value. Why? Because value is accessible. Cost of delay is not. Some of you are familiar with something called the SAFE framework. SAFE does a calculation called WSJF. And in fact, in some of my slides, I probably haven't changed it yet. I still refer to it as WSJF. I have a problem. I have a lot of problems with SAFE. Here's the problem I have with WSJF. Nobody does it because it's not accessible. There's too many factors in it. Weighted short, WSJF is basically weighted shortest job first. It's a way of sequencing work. It has too many factors in it. It's too inaccessible for the people, so people don't do it or they don't do it well. When I talk about value, it doesn't take much time for people to understand. It's more valuable to do this thing today than it is this thing. Everybody gets it. The only people who don't get it are people who overthink it, or people who just want to be obstinate. Because I run into a few of those every once in a while in my career. And then CD3, cost of delay, which we're going to use value as a proxy. And then they talk about effort, or no, sorry, they talk about duration. And I could use duration, but we've always used, almost classically with software developers, the term effort. It's the same thing. Effort is a proxy for duration. So what are we calculating when we do that exercise on day 2? We're calculating CD3. We're just using proxies. A proxy is a stand-in. Just like, you know, cigarette smoking won't cause cancer, but eventually it will. So if you smoke cigarettes, it's a good proxy for somebody who's going to have lung cancer. That's the best I came up with. I got to come up with a better metaphor, but you get what I'm saying. These are good proxies. They point us in the right direction. They help us to understand what we should do next, because that next thing is going to deliver the most value in the shortest amount of time. That's why it's so important. And it's just a sequencing method. We have other sequencing methods, by the way. If I'm in manufacturing and I'm using that as kind of the opposite of what we do in knowledge work, and because I'm, again, trying to do the same thing over and over again, exactly the same. We just use, a lot of times we use LIFO. So some of you are accounting people or something like that. You understand LIFO, or not LIFO, FIFO, sorry. We don't use LIFO, we use FIFO. First in, first out. That's a sequencing method. We could do first in, first out in software development, but it wouldn't make sense, because everything we do is not exactly the same as the thing that we did before, which is what you do in manufacturing. So what do? We take the value, we take the effort, and we say, the higher the ratio, sooner I should do it in an ideal world. And you're going to accelerate your ability to deliver value by leaps and bounds. If what Black Swan Farming found is true, if what the Pareto found is true, that you get the bulk of your value from a small minority of the work you can do, this method is going to deliver so much more value to your customers than anything else you could do, but we don't pay attention to it because in the project world, we assess the entire project and fund the entire project and do the entire project. The biggest cost in the world. This is not just about software development. This is not just about product development. This is about how you can live your life better as well, because some people get that. You should do those things in your life that have the least amount of effort and the most amount of value. Whatever value is to you, because you're your own customer in that case. It makes a big difference because the number one cost in the world is opportunity cost. If I am doing something that is not optimal, I am not only doing the thing that is probably not the right thing to do, I am doing something at the expense of something that is the right thing to do or the optimal thing to do. The opportunity cost I see in most major IT organizations that I've been over the last 12 to 15 years is huge. And we don't pay attention to it. We really don't. Not when we're using project-based funding in a product world. Topic number 2, Reinertsen. Manage your queues. They talked about queues in the Black Swan Farming. In fact, if you notice the graphic they use in Black Swan Farming, very similar to the one I use for my G-code. Right? Queuing theory came to us 1919. It was the first time that it was mentioned somewhere, and somebody found it, and so they say it originated in 1909. Sorry, Erlang was the mathematician. The only reason I mentioned that is sometimes we have software developers who join us on this journey. Erlang is a programming language named after Agner. And according to Reinertsen, the root cause of the majority of economic waste in product development is not understanding and not managing queues properly. I think a lot of you are smart people, and I'm starting to see the light bulbs come on. You know where I'm headed with this. Queues and knowledge work are even more problematic. In manufacturing, it's easy. I think, instead of retiring, maybe I'm just going to go into manufacturing next because it'll be so much easier for me. Because when you're sitting on a factory floor, which I've done before, there's a physical manifestation of queuing. You have physical objects. And all I got to do in manufacturing, this is why it's easy, is I see where the objects pile up in the system. Right? This is supply chain stuff. This is stuff that we screwed up in the pandemic because people bought things irrationally. But I can see where things were piling up. And then I know that I need to work on these areas where the queues are piling up. This is theory of constraints, which we'll get to after this as well. That's easy. Here's the problem with knowledge work. The queues, the product is often invisible. Why? It's an idea. So we've got a bunch of work that's being done off the books, so to speak. That's a problem. We talk a lot in Agile about visualizing work. Why? We need to know what we're doing. Because everything in life, not just in product development, not just in software development, but everything in life is that trade-off. That concept of opportunity cost. Nothing is clean. Everything in life is gray. It's not black and white. It's trade-off. I have to make a decision. There are going to be good things and there are going to be bad things. There's trade-offs that I make. What's the trade-off that I make? It's hard to make a trade-off or understand the trade-off if it's not visualized in some way, shape, or form. That's why manufacturing is so much easier. Now, I know my manufacturing friends will tell me it's not, but it is in this respect. And queues are the biggest problem with this high cost of delay. Because again, knowledge work, invisible. An idea, invisible. At least very often. There's 3 main elements in a queue. You all know queues. This is really easy, but I think I have to talk about it anyway. Traffic's a good example. You have queues, which is the line itself. It's just a line. My friends from England are very good at this. They know this very well. They're very good at queuing. They're known for it. You have customers and you have servers. And traffic, the customers are the cars and the servers are the number of lanes. And you know intuitively, if I reduce the number of lanes of traffic, it's going to increase the queue size and it's going to increase the time it takes you to get wherever you want to go. It's called traffic jam. Rush hour. Right? That's simple queuing theory. If I increase the number of lanes, I increase the flow of the traffic, you get where you're going faster. We'll talk a lot about traffic because it's an easy metaphor, right? Because everything's metaphor. That's why we have metered on-ramps. If anybody knows what a metered on-ramp is, you start to try to get into the highway and then you get, boop, stoplight. Why are they stopping you? Because they're trying to manage the queue. The flow of work into, in this case, the work is the cars, the flow of cars into the highway. And by managing the queue, they're able to actually get people to go where they need to go faster, which is funny because they stopped me before I even started. Kind of counterintuitive in some ways. Disney used to use fast passes. I gave this, it's really interesting, by the way, because I've given this presentation many, many times, and one of my colleagues that I work with now sent me a link about fast passes. It is a whole story. There's a video out there that's like an hour and 20 minutes. I was riveted. I'm a strange person, but it talks about fast passes because what they used to do at Disney is they said, look, we don't make money from you while you're waiting in line. And this is one of the smartest things Disney did. I think they're doing some interesting things legally that I may or may not approve of just recently, but different story. This is one of the smart things they did. And they stopped doing it, but it was really, really complicated and tricky. But here's the simple thing, because I have a big family. I remember 2 years in a row, I think we took like 12 people to Disneyland, or whichever one's in California. I always get them mixed up. Anyway, Disney World. You got to get a second mortgage for that, right? They don't make money while you're waiting in line for a ride, because you're sitting there for an hour or 2 hours, whatever it may be, right? So you're not buying their, $25 hot dog and the $50 Mickey Mouse hat. They're not making money off of you. And it's not a great experience waiting in line for 2 hours, especially if it's hot, right? In the summer. And you don't get to do as many rides. So your joy of Disneyland, which I still never got, but we did it for the kids, is diminished. So they did something very clever. They said, come to the front of the line. We're going to hand you a ticket and we're going to tell you to come back. And that ticket would give you a time. And basically that time said, this is when you would have been able to ride the ride. And this is how long you would have waited if we kept you in line. And then you just come back, hand them the ticket, and boom, you're right on the ride. Oh, it was beautiful, loved it. I really did. This is something that I'm not a huge Disney fan for a number of reasons, but that's okay. That's just me. Loved it. Thought it was the most clever thing I've ever seen. Smart use of queuing theory. But they stopped doing it, actually. They changed it because they've changed it multiple times because there are certain problems with that. But what a great thing to have, right? Where I can just walk up and I don't have to wait in line. And then I can either ride more rides or spend more money. I have a better experience in the park. Just a beautiful thing. It'd be amazing if we do that with traffic, wouldn't it? Back when we used to commute, you remember those days. It wasn't that long ago. It was about 3 years ago when we used to have to commute and we had rush hour. It'd be great if you could just check into a central website and then grab a ticket, right? They say if you leave at 9:15, it's going to take you 15 minutes to get there. You leave at 9, it's going to take you 45 minutes to get there. Just wait till 9:15. Even out the flow. Tough to do. We can do that, by the way. It's called a public transit, but most folks don't pay attention to it. So know your queues. In the greatest graphic of all time, we have any number of queues. In this case, we have both an input and output queue, work that's being waited to work and work that's being waited to be picked up to another queue. And it happens, if I can count right again, about 8 times in this particular system. So you have 16 different queues you're dealing with. That's a problem. I'd love to tell you about all the problems with queues, but I've run out of time because I've been a little bit more loquacious on some things. We will, over the next probably class and maybe a little bit of the following class, go through this in some detail of Reinertsen. It makes a big difference to me. I was talking last night about what I refer to as the aha experience. And in my presentation, the aha experience is when we finally see the world differently. And it's a little bit clearer and it changes everything. Reinertsen's book to me was a big aha for me. And I think it will be for most of you. So more to come. 9 o'clock, got to get back to the salt mine. You all have a wonderful day and you have a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you all again on Tuesday.